Hi, these are the most interesting historical photos that I could find and the facts about them. These are real shots from the past. In 1977, a full Victorian-style San Francisco house was hauled through the streets, showing how entire buildings can be moved instead of demolished. This German Junkers Ju 88 shows rows of mission tally marks on its tail, a quick visual log of intense sorties over the sea. For testing, engineers added a rare rear-facing flame system, one of the strangest defensive ideas ever tried on this bomber. American soldiers pose with captured Imperial German flame units from the First World War, with hoses and round fuel tanks strapped to their backs. Each set was heavy and risky to use, turning a few seconds of fuel into a terrifying close-range weapon. Under San Francisco streets, archaeologists have uncovered buried gold rush ships after the shoreline was expanded by filling Yerba Buena Cove with sand and debris. Crews abandoned many vessels when they rushed for gold, and some remains. In September 1939 at Khalkhin Gol, Soviet gunners inspect a captured Japanese-type 92 Battalion howitzer with more seized guns lined up behind them. A Wehrmacht soldier is seen helping a French girl balance on a bicycle in occupied France, sometime between 1940 and 1944. Photos like this were often staged to show a calm daily life, even while the occupation shaped everything around it. In February 1984 at Clearfield Mall, Boy Scouts from Frenchville Troop 102 worked side by side on a long wooden project during a public event. The photo captures how malls doubled as community hubs where youth groups built, learned. In the 1920s, Pittsburgh's Boulevard of the Allies jammed with cars across 4 lanes, showing how fast traffic exploded in the early auto era. Built along a rocky bluff, it was called the world's most expensive road at the time. In 1931, Venice Beach had a skyline of oil derricks right on the sand, with people swimming and walking below them. This shows how early Los Angeles packed drilling into beach neighborhoods long before modern zoning pushed industry away from the shore. On February 14, 1945, off Iwo Jima, a Marine F-4U Corsair hit USS Bennington's island structure, snapped in half, and burned as fuel spread across the deck track. In the winter of 1958 in Altoona, a man advertises snow shoveling with a simple sign, "Have shovel, will travel." Before apps and online listings, this was local hustle in one photo, using a sidewalk and a board as the entire business plan. In 1943, at the Pennsylvania Railroad Engine House in Pitcairn, Bernice Stevens cleans a steam locomotive with a high-pressure nozzle while earning 58 cents per hour. With her husband in the United States Army, her job shows how wartime railroads relied on mothers. In Pittsburgh in 1919, crowds packed around the city-county building to follow Game 3 of the World Series on a giant public scoreboard as updates were called out. The matchup was Chicago versus Cincinnati. Around 1890, the crew of Colorado's Virginius mine gathered for a rare group photo at over 12,000 feet, where thin air and brutal winters made every shift harder. In July 1895, guests at Bedford Springs Hotel posed on a narrow wooden bridge over a creek, dressed in formal travel clothes for a resort photo. The scene captures how famous spring hotels sold health, fresh air. Henry Ford and Clara Ford sit in the Ford Quadricycle, his first successful car, built in 1896 with a petrol engine rated at 4 horsepower. It looks like a motorized bicycle cart, but this simple machine was the step that led to mass-produced cars a few years later. In 1912, Western Maryland Railroad workers build a steel bridge in Somerset County, while an engineer, John Minder, documents the job from the deck. In 1898 in the Yukon, gold miners work a cut in the earth with pickaxes, shovels, and a pan, chasing the Klondike Rush one bucket at a time. The bare slope and scattered tools show how quickly crews stripped ground down to the pay layer. The crew of HMS Penelope stands beside a hull so pocked with splinter damage that sailors nicknamed her HMS Pepperpot after relentless Mediterranean operations in the Second World War. Those pepper shaker holes are real scars from repeated shell and bomb fragments. Around 1914 in Wardner, Idaho, a Holt Model 60 Caterpillar traction engine hauls wagons loaded with lead ore from the Tyler Lease to the Bunker Hill Mill. This early track machine was a bridge between steam haulage and modern construction tractors. In 1963, a woman watches a tiny Sony portable micro-television in the back seat, with cables running to a box-sized tuner. It looks like a gadget from the future, but it was an early step toward personal screens long before smartphones. RAF personnel lean into the cockpit of a United States-built P-38 Lightning from the 14th Fighter Group during the Second World War. The Lightning's twin-boom design packed heavy firepower. After the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, horse-drawn streetcars still roll through State and Madison streets, while blocks around them sit in blackened ruins. The city kept moving even as workers cleared brick and twisted iron, rebuilding one intersection at a time. Built in 1882, the Carmagnole was an early human-shaped deep-sea suit with 20 small glass portholes because the helmet had no single large window. It weighed over 830 pounds. In 1917, a taxi carries a giant gas bag on its roof, using gas instead of petrol during First World War shortages. The balloon acted like a fuel tank you could see from a block away, turning a normal cab into a rolling experiment. In December 1929, photographer Leslie Jones demonstrates a milk bottle lens camera as 4 men crowd in to watch the odd setup work. It is an early example of DIY optics, proving you can bend light with almost anything if you align it right. On April 1, 1960, the weather satellite Tyros-1 sent back one of the first photos of Earth from space, a grainy curve of cloud and ocean. That blurry edge was enough to prove satellites could watch global weather in real time, changing forecasting forever. In 2026, St. Ignace, Michigan, carved a grid of pond hockey rinks into the frozen surface of Moran Bay for the Labatt Blue Pond Hockey Championship. From above, the event looks like a temporary ice city, with players and fans moving between lanes of snow-cut boundaries. In 1911 at Chelsea Park in New York, a massive crowd packed together to watch a motion picture, long before television existed. Outdoor screenings like this turned a blank wall and a projector into a citywide event with thousands of eyes on the same flickering frame. Around 1900 in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, people rode in a carriage pulled by bison instead of horses. The huge animals could haul heavy loads, turning a farm novelty into a wild-looking street ride. Nanny Mae Hill, also known as Sis Cook, was born in 1901 with no lower arms or hands and shortened legs, yet became a famous American sideshow performer. She was also a skilled artist and ran multiple business ventures during her life. Stefan Bibrowski, known on stage as Lionel, became famous in the early 1900s for hypertrichosis, a rare condition that caused thick hair to cover most of his face and body. In May 1945, American and Soviet soldiers celebrated victory together, sharing drinks after the war in Europe ended. Photos like this capture a brief moment of Soyuz before Cold War tensions split the Allies. In September 1961, West Berliners climbed ladders to wave across the newly built Berlin Wall to friends and family they could suddenly no longer visit. The street sign and the guards show how one city was split overnight into 2 worlds. In 1893, aboard SMS Kaiserin Elizabeth, sailors staged an equator crossing ceremony, dressing up and parading as the ship entered the southern hemisphere for the first time on that voyage. The caption says this photo was taken after a campaign flight on September 2, 1932, showing pilot Hans Bauer standing with the candidate and their crew by the aircraft. It was later seized by Soviet counterintelligence during Bauer's arrest. In 1959 at Yellowstone, United States Park Rangers train with an early Stokes litter, a metal rescue basket built to haul injured people over rough ground. The wheel attachment turns it into a one-person transport rig. In 1969, Apollo 10 Commander Thomas P. Stafford taps the mission's Snoopy mascot while walking to Launch Complex 39B for the dress rehearsal mission before Apollo 11. Apollo 10's lunar module, Snoopy, flew to within about 9 miles of the Moon. On December 2, 1936, in Preston, workers dismantle HMS Roberts, cutting down her twin 14-inch gun turrets at the Thomas W. Ward scrapyard, built for coastal bombardment with some of the heaviest guns afloat. In 1906, in Rhyolite, Nevada, Tom Kelly built the Bottle House with over 50,000 glass bottles mortared with adobe because wood was scarce and costly. He paid local children 10 cents per wheelbarrow of bottles. In 1914, Ford used the Great Sphinx as a backdrop for a Model T promo, linking the new car to an ancient world icon. The image shows how the Model T was sold as a machine built for global travel, even on desert roads. German soldiers moved through street fighting near Novorossiysk in 1942, captured close up in the middle of the chaos. The photographer, war correspondent L. Leixner, was killed on August 14, 1942, while crossing the Kuban River. In 1943, at the Pennsylvania Railroad engine house in Pitcairn, Mary Ankrum, age 28 and a mother of 6, worked as a locomotive preparer for 58 cents per hour. While she worked, her father cared for the children. HMS Prince of Wales, sunk in 1941, now lies about 223 feet down off Kuantan, Malaysia, still upright but heavily damaged by corrosion and illegal salvage that stripped propellers and metal from the stern. On April 18, 1906, San Francisco was hit by a major earthquake, and the fires that followed destroyed over 80% of the city. More than 3,000 people died, and whole neighborhoods were reduced to rubble and smoke. In 1971, Swedish actor Björn Andresen became internationally known after playing Tadzio in Death in Venice, a role that made him a sudden teenage icon. The film won major awards at Cannes and helped define the era's European art cinema. In 1968, Cleveland Browns receiver Paul Warfield posted 50 catches for 1,067 yards, averaging 21.3 yards per catch with 12 touchdowns. This photo shows him hauling in a pass against the New York Giants. In 1932, during the first Shanghai incident, Sasebo Special Naval Landing Force troops fought street to street along Dongba Oxing Road. The mix of rifles, fixed bayonets, and field guns in a city block shows how modern war was already colliding with dense urban streets. This 1959 Ford State Police car carries a roof-mounted speed check dial, an early roadside warning used during traffic enforcement. Its huge tail fins and chrome show peak, late 1950s design, built for high-speed highway patrol work. This is a P-400 Cobra, the export version of the P-39, recognizable by its nose-mounted cannon and car-style side door into the cockpit. The photo shows a field haircut on the wing, a small routine that happened right beside combat aircraft between missions. In March 1936, Pittsburgh's Golden Triangle went underwater during the St. Patrick's Day flood when the Allegheny and Monongahela overflowed into downtown. Boats moved through streets that were normally packed with traffic. In May 1945 in Copenhagen, a Danish resistance member stands guard with a captured Walter PP pistol as the occupation collapses. Photos like this show how quickly ordinary civilians became street-level security during the chaotic handover. In the 1960s, Pittsburgh TV host Bill Chilly Billy Cardill appears on the set of Night of the Living Dead, the low-budget film that became a horror landmark. In 1920, men take a last legal drink before Prohibition began, when the 18th Amendment and the Volstead Act shut down nationwide alcohol sales. The ban did not end drinking, it pushed it into speakeasies. In 1951, Pittsburgh's Penn Lincoln Parkway ended at Bates Street, so cars parked right on the roadway where the highway simply stopped for about 2 years. In 1949, Pittsburgh hillside homes sit above steel mills that fill the valley with smoke and steam, showing how neighborhoods were built right beside the furnaces. This is what Steel City looked like at street level, where daily life. Before the Iwo Jima landing in 1945, 7th Air Force Liberators hit the island's airfields in round-the-clock raids to shut down runways and defenses. This shot shows a tight bomb pattern walking across an airstrip target. In February 1942, Singapore's defenders surrendered after Japanese forces crossed into the island and threatened the only reliable water supply that came from mainland Malaya. The guns faced the wrong way story is a myth. In the 1880s or 1890s in Unalaska, Alaska, a native woman and a young girl stand beside a barabara, a semi-underground communal home built for insulation in harsh coastal weather. On July 15, 1956 in Malibu, actress Natalie Wood balances on Steve Rowland's shoulders during a beach stunt. It is a candid look at Hollywood's mid-century beach culture, mixing celebrity downtime with simple acrobatics. On Christmas Eve, 1971, 17-year-old Julianne Koepke survived the breakup of Lanza Flight 508 over the Peruvian Amazon and fell about 10,000 feet while still strapped to her seat. In 1918, West 34th Street looks east toward 7th Avenue as subway construction tears up the road beside Macy's before the store's major expansion. The 6th Avenue elevated line is visible in the distance. In 1968, Coach Paul Brown reviews prototype Cincinnati Bengals helmets for the franchise's first season, testing variations before the final tiger stripe look. The Bengals launched that year as an AFL expansion team. In 1951, Anita Ekberg is photographed in a Scandinavian Airlines stewardess uniform, complete with cap, wing badge, and double-breasted jacket. The shot reflects the early jet-age marketing of air travel as high status and fashion-forward. On February 15, 1958, Dick Clark launched a new ABC Saturday night music show, and the crowd outside the Little Theater looks like a concert line, not a TV taping. RMS Carpathia, the ship that rescued Titanic survivors, was sunk on July 17, 1918, after German submarine U-55 hit her with 3 torpedoes while she was sailing toward Boston. In 1983, at the Patterson Houses in the Bronx, Darrell Knight cues up vinyl on a street setup for a park jam, using crates of records and headphones like a mobile studio. In 1919, George Papa Bear Halas briefly played Major League Baseball for the New York Yankees, debuting on May 6th and making his final appearance on July 5th. In 1956, on the set of High Society, Frank Sinatra and Grace Kelly pose in a Mercedes-Benz 190 SL Roadster, one of the era's most desired open-top sports cars. The film became Kelly's final screen role before she left Hollywood to become Princess of Monaco. Singer-songwriter Tim Buckley was born in Washington, District of Columbia, on February 14, 1947. His run of late 1960s albums mixed folk, jazz, and experimental vocals, and he was the father of musician Jeff Buckley. In 1946, the newsroom of the Pittsburgh Courier, one of the most widely read black newspapers in the United States, runs on typewriters, wire copy, and stacks of pages ready for print. In 1954, Sam Shaw photographed Marilyn Monroe on the set of The 7-Year Itch in a feather stole during a scene that was later cut from the film. Shaw also captured her most famous images. Grand Duchess Tatiana Romanov is pictured indoors with a French bulldog and a Lexie Spaniel, a rare casual moment from the Russian imperial family's private life. In 1974, people protested outside Minnesota's Westgate Theater because it kept playing Harold and Maude for a 3rd straight year. A 3-year run for one movie was so rare that the theater turned a cult film into a local obsession. At the West Texas Fair in Abilene in 1957, cowboys grab snacks at a concession stand where homemade pie costs 20 cents and hot coffee costs 10. The counter is packed with mid-century brands like Coca-Cola and Dr. Pepper. In 1926, some women skipped real stockings by painting a dark seam down the back of the leg to mimic the look of sheer hose. The trick became popular because silk stockings were expensive and the seam was the most recognizable detail from a distance. In 1920, Babe Ruth posed behind a Boston tobacco shop counter, selling cigars as a publicity stunt at the height of his early Yankee fame. It is the same year he hit 54 home runs, a number that seemed unreal in that era. In the 1980s, doctors examined a patient during the AIDS crisis, when the disease was still poorly understood and treatments were limited. The epidemic drove major changes in modern medicine, including safer blood screening, faster drug development. In 1966, Egyptian leader Anwar Sadat posed at Disneyland shaking hands with Pluto, while Jahan Sadat stood beside him with Mickey and Goofy. It is a surreal Cold War photo op using American pop icons as a backdrop for real-world diplomacy. In 1943 at New York's Penn Station, an 82nd Airborne paratrooper says goodbye before shipping out to the European theater, duffel bag at his feet. The 82nd became one of the first United States airborne divisions. October 1942, Battle of Santa Cruz. A Japanese bomb splashes just behind a United States aircraft carrier as dive bombers pull out overhead. The sky is packed with anti-aircraft bursts, showing how a single attack run could decide a carrier battle in seconds. Between 1875 and 1879, French troops pose at the Kai Mai Pagoda garrison in Saigon, turning a Buddhist site into a colonial outpost. France had seized Saigon in 1859. A Hanoi aristocrat's Tet setup, circa 1920, an ancestor altar framed by calligraphy panels, heavy incense holders, and vases packed with seasonal blooms. The centerpiece offering table is piled with fruit, including large pomelos, and arranged ritual objects. Tet shopping in Hanoi's Old Quarter, circa 1920. A wall-sized display of New Year prints and calligraphy sheets sold to refresh the home with lucky images for the coming year. People browse like it is a street gallery. Polish-Soviet border, Kolosovo, 1932. A staged exchange of political prisoners, with both sides escorted to a marked gateway over the railway tracks. The photo captures the moment the groups were traded across the border under guard. Milan, 1938. A mass rally floods Piazza del Duomo, while an enormous portrait of Benito Mussolini is mounted on the cathedral's facade to dominate the square. This photo shows the battleship USS Maine entering Havana Harbor on January 25, 1898, sent to protect American citizens during unrest in Spanish-ruled Cuba. Just 3 weeks later, a sudden explosion destroyed the ship and took about 2/3 of the crew. Japanese-American farmer near San Jose signs a for the duration lease as his family is forced out under War Relocation Authority orders. In a Manitowoc, Wisconsin saloon around 1895, a small child sits at the table with adults and a tiny mug of beer set right in front of him. In that era, small beer and watered-down lager were common even for kids because they were seen as safer than untreated water. In 1944, a Luftwaffe Messerschmitt Me 410 that ignored Swedish warning shots triggered an air hazard alert and then crashed at Sövde after ground fire, becoming a rare World War II wreck on neutral Swedish soil. On August 19, 1991, Boris Yeltsin climbed onto a tank outside Russia's parliament in Moscow and called people to resist the hardliner putsch, while Mikhail Gorbachev was isolated in Crimea. Vietnamese National Guard troops, Vie Quoc Choan, haul away a captured artillery gun after the Fourth Battle of Tam Vu in 1948 during the First Indochina War. Photos like this show how every seized weapon mattered in a fight where supply lines were thin. This photo was taken after the charge up Kettle Hill in July 1898, when Theodore Roosevelt's 1st Volunteer Cavalry posed alongside troopers of the 10th Cavalry, the famed Buffalo Soldiers, who helped drive the assault. In December 1943 at Cape Gloucester on New Britain, U.S. Marines stepped off an LST into about 3 feet of surf, with rifles held high to keep them dry. That landing was part of the push to take Japanese airfields on the island. In June 2002, in Russia's Smolensk region, recovery crews hauled a German Panzerkampfwagen 3 Ausführung Joy out of a swamp after it sat there since the Second World War. Cold, oxygen-poor bog water can preserve steel for decades. This German soldier is aiming a captured French MS-36, a rugged 5-round bolt-action rifle adopted in 1936. In 1920, men tested an early bulletproof vest by aiming pistols from inches away at a volunteer. Early vests often used layered silk and steel plates and could stop some low-speed pistol hits, but not high-power rifle fire. In the 1950s, actor Clark Gable posed in Henry Ford's famous Model 999, a huge early race car built in 1902. The car helped make Ford a national name after high-speed victories. On February 15, 1926, the Orpheum Theater opened at 842 South Broadway in downtown Los Angeles as the city's fourth and final home for the Orpheum Vaudeville Circuit. Its debut happened on a rainy night, lit by searchlights. In October 1944, residents in Riga greeted Soviet soldiers after the city was taken from German control during the Eastern Front push west. The moment marks Riga's return to Soviet rule, a turning point that reshaped Latvia for decades. In the 1980s, Icelandic strongman John Paul Sigmarsson is shown lifting 551 pounds with one hand while posing with the other. He won World's Strongest Man 4 times and became a symbol of the modern strength era before his death in 1993. On October 13, 1944, a Soviet soldier raised a red banner over Riga after the city was taken from German forces. The flag signaled a new phase of Soviet control in Latvia that would last until the early 1990s. Around 1898, during the Yukon Gold Rush, this log front shop called Sam Kirk, Chemist and Druggist, sold medicine and supplies to miners in a boomtown. In 1913, this walking advertisement promoted George P. Hines and Company in Denver, a supplier of high-grade building specialties, by turning a man's clothes into a full-body billboard. In 1912, Theodore Roosevelt drew such massive crowds on the campaign trail that people climbed rooftops and even telephone poles just to hear him speak. His run as a third-party bull moose candidate split the vote. This photo shows workers inside a wooden boat hull, where the curved ribs reveal the structure before the outer planks go on. The long center line is the keel, often called the ship's spine, and every frame must align to keep the hull strong and straight. In April 1945, Soviet Il-2 aircraft from the 140th Guards Unit flew over Berlin during the final weeks of the war. Nicknamed the Flying Tank, the IL-2 used heavy armor to protect the pilot while making low-altitude strikes on ground targets. Sergei Krikalev launched from the Soviet Union in 1991, but while he lived aboard the Mir space station, the country collapsed and stopped existing. His mission stretched to 311 days, far longer than planned. Soviet officers inspect a ruined Japanese lighthouse at Cape Kokutan on Shumshu Island in the Kuril chain after the Soviet landing in August 1945. Shumshu was one of the last battle zones of the Pacific War. In May 1945, on the first days after the fighting ended in Berlin, Soviet soldiers posed and talked with local civilians in the battered streets. The photo captures the sudden shift from battlefield chaos to uneasy daily life in a city under new occupation. During Operation Bagration in 1944, captured German soldiers marched near Minsk as a disabled Tiger tank looms beside the road. The offensive crushed Army Group Center and became one of the fastest collapses of a major force in the war. In August 1945, near Berlin, a local woman milks a cow while a Soviet soldier watches, a rare calm scene just months after the city's fall. Food was scarce across post-war Germany, so farms like this became vital for basic survival. In 1954, psychiatrist Frederick Wertham published Seduction of the Innocent, warning that crime and horror comics could harm young readers. The backlash helped trigger United States Senate hearings and led to the Comics Code Authority. In 1982, at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial dedication in Washington, a veteran and a woman embraced as crowds gathered around the new wall of names. The memorial lists more than 58,000 names. While we're looking at these stunning images, don't forget to write in the comments which of the historical photos you like the most and why. I will be happy to answer everyone. In the 1940s, Mary kisses Arthur Clement goodbye as he leaves for a naval cruise, freezing one last calm moment before their marriage ended. They divorced in 1949, and later he broke into her home to take back the stamp collection they built together. In Chicago in 1974, hound dog tailor Lefty Diz and harmonica star James Cotton met at the Checkerboard Lounge, a key South Side blues spot. Taylor's raw slide guitar sound helped launch Alligator Records. On May 27, 1957, Marilyn Monroe posed in her dressing room with the dog from her Time magazine photo shoot where she recreated Jean Harlow's look. The long-nosed borzoi became a perfect old Hollywood prop. In May 1945, a Berlin resident carrying buckets walks past a Soviet poster urging people to raise the victory banner over Berlin. The contrast shows how propaganda filled the streets while civilians focused on basic survival in a shattered city. This is Geert Adriaens Boomgaard on his 100th birthday in 1888, later confirmed by scholars as the first verified person to reach age 110. He lived 10 more years and outlived all 12 of his children. In the 1930s, Daimler-Benz staged a massive Heil Hitler message on an airfield beside the Mercedes three-pointed star. It shows how major companies used huge choreographed displays to signal loyalty and win favor in Nazi Germany. In 1945 at Muscle Beach in California, 9-year-old April posed in a famous strength stunt, stacked with her family for a human pyramid lift. The over 425 pounds claim was likely a show estimate and balance trick. In 1935, Emperor Haile Selassie I was photographed on the front lines during Italy's invasion of Ethiopia, even handling a mounted gun himself. After years of resistance, he returned to Addis Ababa in 1941 as Italian forces were pushed out with Allied support. This shows University of Missouri Tigers football in the 1920s, when players wore leather helmets and no face masks while running on muddy fields. Under Coach Gwynn Henry, Missouri won Missouri Valley titles in 1924. This is the wreck of the USS Maine in Havana Harbor after the February 15, 1898 blast that took 261 crew lives. The mystery fueled the rallying cry, "Remember the Maine," and helped push the United States toward the Spanish-American War. In October 1966, President Lyndon B. Johnson visited Cam Ranh Bay in South Vietnam and shook hands with United States airmen on the flight line. The trip was meant to boost morale as the air war and troop levels expanded sharply in 1966. In January 1917, a work party from the 2nd Battalion of the Manchester Regiment moved toward the trenches near Serre on the Somme front. These parties carried wire, timber, and supplies under constant shelling to keep the trench system from collapsing. In 1955, Albert Pierrepoint is pictured at Euston Station traveling home after carrying out the final legal hanging of a woman in Britain, Ruth Ellis. Over 25 years, he carried out more than 400 court-ordered hangings. On February 9, 1945, a Bristol Beaufighter TF Mark 10 from No. 144 Squadron sits wrecked after a crash landing at Royal Air Force Dallachy in Scotland. This torpedo fighter version was built for low-level strikes. Austro-Hungarian mountain artillery crews haul a gun into position along the snowy Montenegro border during the First World War Balkan fighting. In this terrain, crews used lighter howitzers that could be broken down. On June 27, 1953, at the 24 Hours of Le Mans, Tony Rolt and Duncan Hamilton won for Jaguar in their C-Type. They set a record average of about 105.6 miles per hour. In March 1931 at Alameda, California, the destroyer USS Reno is shown stripped down and waiting to be scrapped. Ships like this were cut up early under post-war naval limits, turning once modern warships into metal in just a few years. In 1942, Hollywood actor Cesar Romero enlisted in the United States Coast Guard and paused his career to serve in the Pacific during the Second World War. He is remembered as one of the few major stars of his era to serve without seeking special treatment. In 1934, at Darrington State Farm in Texas, Lightnin' Washington led a prison work gang that sang in rhythm while chopping wood. These work songs set the pace and became rare field recordings that preserved early African-American labor music. In 1946, over Malaya, Allied Technical Air Intelligence Unit teams flew captured Japanese A-6M0 fighters to test and document their real performance after the war. In 1976, in Pagsanjan, Philippines, photographer Mary Ellen Mark sat on the Apocalypse Now, set with Marlon Brando during the film's famously difficult shoot. On May 11, 1951, at Yokosuka Naval Base, United States sailors examined a cutaway Kyryu-class Japanese midget submarine to study its layout and systems. Built late in the Second World War for coastal defense. In Texas in 1922, two boys posed with a toy oil derrick while real drilling rigs filled the horizon behind them. The scene shows how the oil boom was so big it turned into children's play, with miniature rigs sold like model trains. This old-school hockey game shows goalies without masks and skaters without helmets, long before modern safety gear became standard. In the stands, fans in suits sit inches from the ice, proving how rough the sport looked up close in that era. In New York in 1931, acrobats performed a high-wire act above a packed street crowd, using only a simple rig and raw grip strength. Spectacles like this were common outdoor promotions before strict safety rules, drawing thousands to watch from the sidewalks below. In 1895, the Russian ship Urania crossed the Kattegat Strait, while sea spray froze into thick ice that buried the deck and rigging. This dangerous icing can raise a ship's weight and tip it over, so crews had to smash ice off by hand to stay afloat. In the 1930s, this corner bakery belonged to Berhard Benzian in Osterode, then part of East Prussia, and now the Polish town of Ostroda. The calm storefront hides how the region's borders and population would be completely reshaped after the Second World War. In 1956, photographer Frank Paulin captured the Queensboro Bridge, looming over a quiet New York street, turning steel and haze into a massive city silhouette. On January 3, 1966, United States Navy veteran and student Sammy Young Jr. refused to use a segregated restroom at a Tuskegee gas station and died after an attack by the attendant. The attendant was later acquitted by an all-white jury. In August 1943, near Kharkov, Red Army infantry under Captain Nazarenko used a knocked-out Panzer V Panther as cover during the Polkovodets Rumyantsev offensive. James Whitmore built a 50-year career across film, television, and theater, earning a Tony Award, a Grammy Award, and an Emmy Award. He also received 2 Academy Award nominations for Battleground and Give 'Em Hell, Harry. In 1911, in Pittston, Pennsylvania, boys worked as coal breakers, picking rock and slate out of coal on fast-moving chutes. Many started as young as 8, breathing coal dust for long shifts to save mine owners time and money. On November 11, 1940, a shot-down Italian Fiat CR-42 Falco biplane lies wrecked in England, a rare sight in a war already dominated by faster monoplanes. The CR-42 was one of the last biplane fighters to see major combat. In 1930, the Japanese aircraft carrier Kaga runs training off Japan with B-1M Type 13 torpedo planes on the upper deck and A-1N Type 3 fighters below. These early carrier aircraft look primitive, but they were the stepping stones that built Japan's naval air power. In 1945, United States airmen posed beside the Leaning Tower of Pisa during the Allied occupation of Italy. turning a war zone into a quick sightseeing stop. The tower's famous tilt comes from a weak foundation in soft soil. In spring 1941 in Greece, two soldiers pose in heavy coats and steel helmets during the campaign that ended with Axis occupation. The mud-caked gear and blank stares hint at how fast the fighting. In 1944, an Istituto Luce photographer shot pictures from the front line while soldiers fired beside him, showing how close wartime journalism could get. Istituto Luce was Italy's state film and photo agency. This is a Philadelphia Police Department booking photo from September 18, 1964, showing both profile and front views with the case number on the placard. The curlers and hard stare make it feel like you are seeing a real person in mid-story. This shows morning routine in a trench on the Isonzo front, where soldiers lived between rock walls in the Alps along the Italy-Austria-Hungary line. The Isonzo battles were fought in brutal terrain, with mud, cold, and constant artillery turning simple tasks like washing into a daily risk. In 1860, Paul von Hindenburg posed as a cadet, long before he became Germany's top commander in the First World War. As president, he later appointed Adolf Hitler chancellor in 1933, a decision that changed Europe's fate. In 1930, at Dengue, Kent, physicist Percy Rothwell stands beside a 30-foot sound mirror built to catch enemy aircraft noise long before the planes arrived. These concrete acoustic radars were soon made obsolete when real radar arrived in the mid-1930s. This is Rabbi Yosef Chaim Ursharga from Yazd, Iran, photographed in 1946, representing one of the oldest Jewish communities in the region. Yazd's desert city isolation helped preserve unique local traditions, language, and rituals for centuries. In 1942, troops from Italy's Expeditionary Corps marched down Karl Marx Street in occupied Voroshilovgrad, now Luhansk. On the left sits a First World War Mark IV tank, already a relic, repurposed as a roadside trophy in the Second World War. This shows the shattered church on Monte Santo near Gorizia, after heavy Italian bombardment during the Isonzo fighting in the First World War. Even stone walls and a clock face could be ripped apart on these ridgelines, where artillery dominated every position. In November 1943, aboard the USS Lexington, Hellcat pilots celebrated after intercepting a Japanese raid during the Marshall Islands strikes. Their group claimed 17 of 20 incoming aircraft headed toward Tarawa. Around 1920, Japanese women pose in a cyclonette, a German-made early motor tricycle sold worldwide as a small car before mass-market sedans took over. With motorcycle-style steering and a lightweight body, it shows how experimental early road vehicles still were. In 1943 at Munda Point, VMF 214 Black Sheep flew this F-4 U-1A Corsair Bureau number 17799, marked 829. In 1915, Russia tested the giant Tsar tank, a tricycle-style war machine about 30 feet tall with huge front wheels and engines for each wheel. It smashed through obstacles in trials, but sank into mud and was abandoned until it was dismantled years later. In February 1945 on Corregidor, a paratrooper from the 503rd Parachute Regimental Combat Team fires a Browning automatic rifle at Japanese positions. The 503rd made a rare combat jump onto the island, fighting through ruins. In the early 1900s, two Ainu men from Hokkaido posed with traditional hunting gear, showing a culture distinct from mainstream Japan. Their clothing patterns and tools hint at a people whose language and customs were long pressured to disappear. A sharply dressed black entertainer arrives at an airport, striding past a propeller airliner while several uniformed officers escort him through the crowd. Photos like this show how fame could bring both access and constant surveillance for black stars in mid-century America. Around 1915 on the Eastern Front, a German officer lights a cigarette for a wounded Russian soldier in a shell-torn trench. The image freezes a rare human moment inside a war that was usually shown as pure mud, wire, and mass attacks. In 1936, people walked across the frozen Mississippi River between East St. Louis and St. Louis, using the ice as a shortcut under a bridge. A freeze strong enough to hold crowds is rare on a river this large, making this photo feel almost unreal. In 1952, a teenage Brigitte Bardot swings at her grandparents' home in Louveciennes, outside Paris, months before fame reshaped her life. Within a few years, she became one of Europe's biggest film stars and a style icon copied worldwide. Rico Browning, born February 16, 1930, became the underwater performer for the Gilman in the 1954 film Creature from the Black Lagoon. His breath-hold stunt work helped define how Hollywood shot underwater scenes decades before modern gear. Around 1914, photographer Edward S. Curtis documented Kwakwaka'wakw ceremonial masks and dress from the Pacific Northwest coast, creating some of the most famous indigenous portrait images ever made. In 1915, Chelsea, a man walks through London carrying an entire fir tree on his back, disappearing into its branches like a moving bush. The foggy street and staring kids make it feel like a one-frame mystery from the First World War home front. On January 25, 1944, an F-6 F-5 Hellcat from VF-21 ditched off San Diego and sank intact enough to be found later. Divers salvaged it in 1970, showing how wartime aircraft can sleep underwater for decades and still return to the surface. On June 27, 1994 in Houston, Anna Nicole Smith married oil businessman J. Howard Marshall II, who was 89. The marriage triggered a long headline legal fight over his estate after his death the next year. On February 16, 1972, Led Zeppelin began their first Australian tour at Subiaco Oval in Perth, launching a 6-date run. Reports say over 500 fans pushed locked gates as police tried to hold the crowd outside. This rare photo shows the interior of Hitler's Berlin bunker after the war, with cramped rooms, improvised wiring, and basic gear that looks more like a basement office than a fortress. Most of the bunker was later sealed and buried as the city rebuilt. In 1955 at Farringdon in London, a long line of people curves around a bomb-damaged block that still sits open to the street. A decade after the war, the city is moving again with buses and cars, but the empty ruins are still part of the daily commute. In March 1916, near Cotton, troops marched in review past Emperor Nicholas II on the Eastern Front. Within a year, the empire he ruled would be shaken by revolution, and his army would start to break apart. In 1876, the Statue of Liberty's arm and torch were displayed at the Centennial Exhibition in Philadelphia years before the full statue was finished. Visitors could climb into the torch, and ticket money helped fund the statue's construction. In 1980, Robin Williams and Shelley Duvall rehearsed a dance step on the Popeye set, filmed in a full seaside Sweet Haven village built in Malta. The set was so permanent that it later became a tourist attraction. In 1961, a rider sits on a Vespa while a man leans in to give directions, with a small car parked beside them like a roadside pit stop. The Vespa had already become a post-war symbol of cheap freedom, putting whole cities within reach on a tiny engine. Otis Blackwell, born February 16, 1931 in Brooklyn, wrote hit songs that powered the early rock era, including Don't Be Cruel, All Shook Up, and Return to Sender. Dresden, after the British and American raids of the 13th to the 15th of February, 1945, where whole streets became rubble while the church dome still stands. The shock is that the Frauenkirche was rebuilt from its original stones and reopened in 2005. A champion bodybuilder holds a classic pose on the Mr. Olympia stage in 1975, when the contest was still filmed with harsh lights that made every line look carved in stone. The wild part is that the winner that year took the title in a new weight class era. In 1916, John and Walter Wegman launched a small produce business in Rochester, starting with simple trucks and stacks of fresh crates outside their building. The crazy part is that this humble start later grew into Wegmans, one of the most loved grocery chains in the United States. Rockaway Beach, New York, 1946. A police officer writes a ticket because a woman's swimwear was judged too revealing for public standards of the time. The jaw drop is that this was normal in many cities. Los Angeles, 1984. Muhammad Ali cruises in a Rolls-Royce Corniche, looking calm as palm trees blur past the window. The twist is that he turned fame into a message machine, using every camera moment like this to keep his voice louder than any arena. British entertainer George Formby poses with his 1937 Packard Super 8 Coupe Roadster, a luxury machine built when big engines and long hoods were the status symbol of the road. The juicy detail is that this Packard's smooth, straight 8-power made it a quiet rocket for its day. A Boeing B-17. Flying Fortress sits nose down in a ditch, its crew climbing over the tail after a rough landing that left the 4 engines and big wings still mostly intact. The insane fact is that these planes were built to keep flying even when badly damaged. Berlin, May 1945. A postal worker tears pages from a notorious propaganda book, turning a symbol of control into scraps in the street. Warsaw, November 1918. Polish guards stand watch as German troops are disarmed, a street-level snapshot of an empire losing its grip. The punchline is that this moment helped open the door for Poland to reappear as an independent state after more than 100 years off the map. January 15, 1965, at the Semipalatinsk test site in Kazakhstan. Chagin 231 released energy equal to about 140 kilotons and carved a crater roughly 330 meters wide and 178 meters deep. Golden Gate Bridge, around 1935. Workers stand on a steel tower in fog as they build the future record holder with a 4,200-foot main span when it opened in 1937. Around 1955, a grocery store built a Duke's Mayonnaise temple by stacking hundreds of jars into a huge shrine-like display to stop shoppers in their tracks. The juicy fact is that the recipe began in 1917 with Eugenia Duke in Greenville, South Carolina. New York City, 1932. Window washers cling to the Empire State Building with the streets looking like tiny lines far below. The insane detail is that this skyscraper opened in 1931 and rose to 1,250 feet. Subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss the daily selection of historical photos. I spend hours making these videos and selecting those photos that you haven't seen yet. Thank you for your activity, friends.